The Desert Fox returns. The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the Wehrmacht headquarters in Fontainebleau, France, October 1943. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood alone in his temporary office, staring at maps scattered across an oak table worn by years of military planning. The legendary Desert Fox had returned from North Africa 9 months earlier, his Africa Corps defeated, his reputation tarnished by retreat and surrender. At 52, Rommel's face bore the deep lines of a man who had witnessed the gradual erosion of certainty. His piercing blue eyes, once filled with the fire of tactical brilliance, now carried something heavier, doubt. The rain outside matched his internal storm. Herr Feldmarschall, General Speidel is here to see you, announced Lieutenant Werner Hoffmann, a young officer from Bavaria whose youth seemed almost offensive in its optimism. Send him in, Rommel replied, his voice carrying the distinctive Swabian accent that no amount of military formality could erase. General Hans Speidel entered, shaking water from his coat. The two men had known each other since the Great War, and their friendship allowed for conversations that would be treasonous with anyone else. Erwin, Speidel said, dispensing with formality once the door closed. You look like you haven't slept in days. Sleep is a luxury for men who don't see what's coming, Rommel muttered, gesturing to the maps. Look at this, Hans. Really look at it. Speidel approached the table, studying the defensive positions along the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's grand vision of an impregnable fortress stretching from Norway to Spain. The Führer believes this wall will stop the Allied invasion, Rommel continued, his finger tracing the French coastline. But I've walked these beaches. I've inspected these bunkers. We have concrete and barbed wire, but we lack the one thing that matters most, men and material we can actually move when needed. The wall is strong, Speidel offered, though his tone suggested he was testing rather than believing. Rommel's laugh was bitter. Strong? Hans, I've just come from Pas-de-Calais. Yes, we have artillery positions and obstacles in the water. But our divisions are under strength, our equipment outdated, and most critically, we have no air cover. None. The Luftwaffe is a ghost of what it was. He pulled out a worn photograph from his breast pocket, his wife Lucy and son Manfred at their home in Hurlingen. The image seemed to soften something in his weathered face. In Africa, I could maneuver, he said quietly. I could use the desert's vastness, strike quickly, withdraw, live to fight another day. But here. He gestured at the maps again. Here we're static. We must hold every meter of coastline because we don't have the fuel to move reserves, we don't have the air power to protect them if we could move them, and we don't have the industrial capacity to replace what we lose. Speidel pulled up a chair, understanding this was more than a tactical discussion. When did you first realize? Rommel was silent for a long moment, the rain the only sound. El Alamein, he finally said. October 1942. Montgomery had everything, tanks, fuel, air superiority, fresh troops. We had courage and clever tactics. I knew then, standing in the desert watching British aircraft strafe our positions with impunity, that we couldn't win a war of attrition against enemies with unlimited resources. But you fought on, Speidel observed. Of course I fought on. I'm a soldier. But fighting on and believing in victory are two different things. Rommel stood and walked to the window, watching French civilians hurry through the rain below. In Tunisia, I saw it even more clearly. The Americans arrived, inexperienced, yes, but learning quickly and backed by an industrial machine we cannot match. Every tank we destroyed, they replaced with 3 more. Every plane we shot down, 5 more appeared. He turned back to Speidel, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The mathematics of this war are simple, Hans. Germany cannot outproduce America, Britain, and the Soviet Union combined. We cannot fight on 3 fronts indefinitely. And we cannot win without air superiority, which we've already lost. These are dangerous thoughts, Erwin, Speidel warned, though not unkindly. Dangerous but true, Rommel countered. And here's what terrifies me most, when the invasion comes, and it will come, we'll have one chance to throw them back into the sea in the first 48 hours. If we fail, if they establish a beachhead, the war is over. They'll grind us down with their overwhelming material advantage. Then we must not fail, Speidel said simply. Rommel returned to the table, studying the maps with renewed intensity. To succeed, I need mobile reserves positioned close to the coast, ready to counterattack immediately. But Hitler insists on keeping the panzer divisions far inland, under his direct control. By the time he releases them, if he releases them, the Allies will have air superiority over the battlefield. Our tanks will be destroyed before they reach the coast. Have you told the Führer this? I've tried, Rommel said, frustration evident in his voice. He doesn't listen. He sees the world as he wishes it to be, not as it is. He speaks of miracle weapons and unbreakable German will, but will doesn't stop artillery shells, Hans. Will doesn't replace burned-out tanks. The two men were interrupted by a knock at the door. Lieutenant Hoffmann entered with a dispatch from Berlin. Herr Feldmarschall, orders from OKW. You're to submit detailed plans for coastal defense improvements and attend a conference in Munich next month. Rommel took the papers, scanning them quickly. More meetings. More reports. More time wasted while the Allies prepare. He dismissed Hoffmann and looked at Speidel. Do you know what I did last week? I ordered thousands of additional obstacles placed below the high water mark, hedgehogs, Belgian gates, mine stakes. I'm turning the beaches into a maze of death because it's the only thing I can control. Rommel's asparagus, Speidel said with a slight smile, referring to the nickname troops had given the defensive Poles. Mock if you want, but those Poles might buy us the minutes we need when the landing craft approach. Rommel's expression was grim. Though minutes won't matter if we can't move reserves to support the beach defenders. The rain intensified outside, drumming harder against the glass. Rommel moved to pour 2 glasses of cognac from a bottle on the sideboard, French, confiscated, but in this moment, neither man cared about the irony. There's something else, Rommel said after taking a sip. I've been receiving letters from home. Lucy tells me the bombing raids on German cities are getting worse. Stuttgart, Munich, Berlin, they're being turned to rubble. The civilian population is suffering terribly. The British and Americans call it strategic bombing, Speidel noted darkly. They're destroying our industrial capacity and breaking civilian morale, Rommel said bluntly. And we can't stop them because the Luftwaffe is too busy trying to defend the Reich to support us here. It's a vicious circle. We lose the air war at home, which means we have no air cover here, which means we'll lose the ground war when the invasion comes. He set down his glass with more force than intended. I'm 52 years old, Hans. I've been a soldier for 35 years. I've served Germany faithfully through 2 world wars. But I'm beginning to wonder if faithfully serving means telling comfortable lies or... That's a question every officer must answer for himself, Speidel replied carefully. Rommel studied his old friend. You've heard the rumors, haven't you? About what's happening in Poland and the occupied territories. Speidel's face went carefully neutral. Rumors are dangerous things to discuss. So they're true, Rommel said heavily. It wasn't a question. God help us, they're true. I've commanded armies in honorable combat, Hans. I've fought enemies I respected, like Montgomery and Patton. But this... He couldn't finish the sentence. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken horrors and moral calculations that neither man wanted to fully confront. What will you do? Speidel finally asked. Rommel walked back to the maps, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I'll do my duty as a soldier. I'll make the Atlantic Wall as strong as possible. I'll fight with everything I have to throw back the invasion because German soldiers under my command deserve a commander who fights for them. But I'll do it with open eyes, Hans. I'll do it knowing that we're not fighting for victory anymore, we're fighting to delay the inevitable and perhaps, if we're lucky, to secure better terms when the end comes. That's treason, Spidell said quietly. No, Rommel corrected. That's reality. Treason would be surrendering. Reality is understanding the mathematics of warfare and preparing for what comes next. A knock at the door interrupted them again. This time it was a courier from Field Marshal von Rundstedt's headquarters with new intelligence reports on Allied buildup in England. After the courier left, Rommel spread out the new documents. The numbers were staggering, divisions upon divisions massing across the Channel, landing craft being produced at an impossible rate, an air armada that would darken the skies. Look at this, he said to Spidell. Eisenhower has over 1 million men in Britain now, with more arriving every week. We have 60 divisions spread across the entire Atlantic Wall, many of them static formations filled with old men and teenagers. The best estimate is they'll hit us with 10-to-1 superiority at the point of attack. Then we must guess correctly where they'll land, Spidell observed. Calais, Rommel said with certainty. It's the closest point to England, the best port facilities, the most direct route to Germany. Hitler agrees with me on this at least. And if you're wrong? Rommel's expression was troubled. If I'm wrong, and they land somewhere else, Normandy, perhaps, or Brittany, then we'll have concentrated our limited forces in the wrong place. But that's the gamble we must take because we don't have enough strength to be strong everywhere. He collapsed into his chair, suddenly looking every year of his age. Do you know what keeps me awake at night, Hans? Not the fear of defeat, I've already accepted that as likely. It's the thought of all the young men who will die on both sides when the invasion comes. German boys barely old enough to shave, manning bunkers that won't save them. American and British soldiers drowning in the surf under machine gun fire. All that death, all that waste, for an outcome that's already mathematically determined. Then why fight at all? Spidell asked the dangerous question. Rommel's answer was immediate and fierce. Because I'm a soldier of Germany. Because those young men in the bunkers deserve a commander who fights for them, who uses every tactical skill he possesses to keep them alive as long as possible. Because even if the war is lost, honor demands we fight well. And because. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because the better we fight, the more seriously the Allies will take Germany at the negotiating table when this is over. You're thinking about the peace before the war is finished, Spidell observed. Someone has to, Rommel replied. The Führer certainly isn't. He talks of fighting to the last man, of never surrendering, of bringing the war to American soil. It's madness, Hans. Complete madness. A sane leadership would already be looking for a way to end this with minimal further destruction. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle. Through the window, Rommel could see French workers repairing damage from a recent British bombing raid. Life continued even in the shadow of war. I received a letter from Manfred yesterday, Rommel said, pulling out another piece of paper. He's 15 now, eager to join the Wehrmacht like his father. Lucy writes that he talks constantly of serving Germany, of glory and duty. You must be proud, Spidell offered. I'm terrified, Rommel admitted. He has no idea what war really is. He thinks it's the newsreels and the propaganda, clean victories, noble causes, brave soldiers never questioning their orders. He doesn't know about the mud and blood and screaming. He doesn't know about lying awake at night counting the cost of your decisions in other men's lives. He folded the letter carefully. I pray this war ends before he's old enough to fight. I pray that Germany survives long enough to build something better after this catastrophe. Those are the prayers of a patriot, Spidell said gently. Or a realist who's finally confronting what he's known deep down since El Alamein, Rommel countered. He stood, squaring his shoulders as if physically taking up the burden again. But enough philosophy. We have work to do. Whether the war is won or lost, I'll be damned if I don't do everything possible to prepare these defenses properly. For the next hour, the two generals pored over maps and reports, discussing fields of fire, reinforcement schedules, supply chains, and the 1,000 details that separated adequate defenses from strong ones. Rommel was methodical and brilliant, his tactical mind still sharp even as his strategic confidence had eroded. As evening fell and Speidel prepared to leave, Rommel walked him to the door. "Hans," he said quietly. "If things go badly, when things go badly, remember this conversation. Remember that some of us saw the truth and tried to plan accordingly." "I'll remember," Speidel promised. "But Erwin, be careful. These thoughts, these doubts, they're dangerous. There are people who would call them defeatism." "Let them," Rommel said with a flash of his old defiance. "I've earned the right to see clearly. I've bled for Germany in 2 wars. I've commanded armies and won victories. If I say we're in trouble, it's not defeatism, it's professional military assessment." After Speidel left, Rommel returned to his desk. He pulled out a leather journal he'd been keeping since Africa, private thoughts never meant for official reports. He wrote carefully by lamplight. October 15, 1943. Spent the day reviewing Atlantic Wall defenses. They are inadequate for what's coming. We face an enemy with unlimited industrial capacity, complete air superiority, and the patience to prepare thoroughly before striking. Our greatest hope is that they make mistakes in the invasion itself, land in bad weather, choose poor beaches, fail to exploit initial successes. But hope is not strategy, and strategy requires resources we no longer possess. I find myself in the strange position of fighting not for victory but for favorable defeat, if such a thing exists. God help Germany. God help us all. He closed the journal and locked it in his desk drawer. Tomorrow would bring more inspections, more reports, more attempts to build something strong enough to matter when the storm finally broke. But tonight, alone with his thoughts and the sound of rain, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel faced the hardest truth a commander can confront, that courage and skill might not be enough, that the mathematics of warfare sometimes override even the most brilliant tactics, and that his beloved Germany was heading toward a reckoning from which there might be no recovery. Outside, the rain continued to fall on France's occupied coast, washing over bunkers and obstacles and the beaches where, in 7 months' time, the fate of the war would be decided in blood and fire. The weight of command. The cold December wind swept across the Normandy coast as Field Marshal Rommel stood on a concrete bunker overlooking what the French called Omaha Beach. His heavy greatcoat did little to block the Atlantic chill, but he barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the gray waters stretching to the horizon, mentally calculating approach angles, tide patterns, and killing zones. "Herr Feldmarschall, you'll catch pneumonia standing out here," Lieutenant Hoffman called from the bunker entrance. "Better pneumonia than being unprepared when they come," Rommel replied without turning. He'd been making these inspection tours relentlessly since October, driving his staff to exhaustion as he examined every kilometer of coastline from Brittany to Holland. Major Ernst Bergen, the local sector commander, emerged from the bunker to join him. Bergen was 43, a veteran of the Eastern Front with a limp from a Russian grenade and eyes that had seen too much. "The obstacles are going in as you ordered, Herr Feldmarschall," Bergen reported. "We've placed over 50,000 stakes along this 5-kilometer sector alone." "But..." He hesitated. "But what, Major?" Rommel's tone invited honesty. "But the men wonder if it's enough. They see the concrete emplacements, they install the mines and wire, but they also know what the enemy has across that water. The RAF flies over daily with impunity. We hear the bomber streams headed for Germany every night. The men aren't stupid, they can count too." Rommel studied the major's face, another good officer forced to contemplate impossible odds. "What's morale like among the troops?" Bergen chose his words carefully. "The veterans are professional. They'll fight because that's what soldiers do. But the younger ones, the conscripts, the Austruppen." He referred to the Eastern European volunteers of dubious loyalty. "They're scared. Some talk openly about surrender at the first opportunity." "I can't blame them," Rommel said quietly, so quietly that Bergen wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Herr Feldmarschall." Rommel turned to face him fully. "Major, I'm going to tell you something that must never leave this conversation. Can I trust you? With my life, sir. When the invasion comes, and it will come in the spring or early summer, we'll have one chance. The first day, perhaps the first hours. We must destroy them on the beaches while they're vulnerable, while they're still organizing under fire. If they get off the beaches and establish a secure foothold, we lose. Not might lose, will lose. Because they have an advantage we cannot overcome, they can replace their losses and we cannot. Bergen absorbed this, his face grave. Then we must ensure they don't get off the beaches. Exactly, Rommel affirmed. Which is why I'm driving everyone so hard. Every mine we plant, every obstacle we place, every bunker we reinforce, it all matters. The men need to understand that. We're not building defenses for show. We're building the only thing standing between Germany and total defeat. They walked along the beach, Rommel occasionally stopping to examine the placement of obstacles or sketch improvements in a small notebook he always carried. The sand was littered with construction materials, steel beams, concrete, barbed wire rolls. Tell me about your family, Major, Rommel said unexpectedly. Bergen seemed surprised by the personal question. My wife Greta and 2 daughters, sir. They're in Hamburg. Or what's left of Hamburg after the firestorm this summer. They survived? Yes, thank God. But our home is gone. They're living with Greta's sister now. Bergen's voice carried controlled anger. The British burned half the city. 30,000 dead in a single night. Women and children, mostly. Rommel was silent for a moment. War has become something monstrous, he finally said. In the Great War, we fought armies. Now we fight entire nations, soldiers, workers, civilians. Everyone and everything is a target. Is that why you're so determined to stop them here? Bergen asked. To keep the fighting away from German soil? Partly, Rommel admitted. Every day we hold them here is another day German cities aren't battlefields. But there's more to it. He stopped walking and faced the sea again. I served in Africa, Major. I fought the British and Americans there. I learned something important, they're not monsters. They're soldiers like us, following orders, scared and brave in equal measure. Young men who'd rather be home with their families. Then why do they bomb civilians? Bergen's question carried an edge. Because we started it, Rommel said bluntly. Rotterdam, Warsaw, London, we taught them that cities are legitimate targets. Now they've learned the lesson and applied it with their typical industrial efficiency. He paused. But that's not my point. My point is that if we must lose this war, and Major, I believe we must, then it's better to lose it to the Western Allies than to the Soviets. Bergen's eyes widened. Herr Feldmarschall, such talk is realistic, Rommel interrupted. The Soviets will show no mercy. We've given them reasons to hate us, God knows. But the Americans and British? They'll occupy Germany, yes, but they'll also rebuild it. They'll impose order but not extermination. That's why we must fight here, to keep the Eastern Front as far from German heartland as possible while negotiating something survivable with the West. You've thought about this a great deal, Bergen observed. I'm a field marshal. Strategic thinking is my job. Rommel resumed walking. But I'm also a father and a husband. I think about what kind of Germany my son will inherit. Right now, the answer is frightening. They reached a section of beach where a work detail was driving stakes into the sand, Rommel's asparagus. The soldiers snapped to attention as the field marshal approached. At ease, men, Rommel called. Continue your work. I want to watch. The crew returned to their task, driving stakes deep into the tidal sand and topping each with a mine. Rommel observed the spacing, the depth, the angles. Good work, he told the supervising sergeant. When the landing craft hit these at high tide, they'll rip their bottoms out. Every craft you stop is 20 or 30 invaders who never reach the beach. We'll stop them, Herr Feldmarschall, the sergeant said with genuine determination. After moving on, Bergen asked quietly, do you really believe that? That will stop them? I believe we'll kill thousands of them, Rommel replied. The question is whether that will be enough. In Africa, I learned that Americans absorb casualties that would break most armies and keep coming. They have a different relationship with loss, individual lives matter to them, but they understand arithmetic.